Producing. God, the last album I put out in the Bay Area, there's a big discussion of whether we put out in vinyl or CD. That was a huge discussion over it. And the discussion centered on, do we want to go with the new technology, or do we want to go with the one that everybody has in their house?
Yeah.
So we made the wrong choice, we went with vinyl. I did listen to the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Neil Diamond, and I remember using their stereo, listening to it. In terms of sort of selecting my own music to listen to, I didn't really do that till probably about high school. And started listening to, like Pink Floyd, The Grateful Dead, Deep Purple, that sort of what today you would call classic rock. Although Jerry Garcia might be offended to be called classic rock, but his and, I got into music in a big way starting sort of in high school. I would often go to sleep listening to an album on headphones. Sometime in the middle of the night, headphones would disappear.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, listening to music is a very fine way to fall asleep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With records, you listen to an album.
Yeah.
And people, in terms of framing a musical product, you would worry about what's the first song, what's the second song, and think about the order that you presented stuff as an artist, because it mattered, because that's how people would listen to it. Today it's a little different, because each song is sort of a standalone in that sense. Some people still do concept albums or do things where the sequencing is an intentional part of the presentation.
Right.
But with albums, it was a central part of it. Well, my favorite medium is live. Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about my answer to that question. Live music is better. But I'm a musician, so it's like I'm sort of predisposed to have that opinion. Aside from that answer, in terms of my favorite sort of technological medium, I think probably CDs would be my honest answer. I think if you asked me again 10 years from now, I'd tell you whatever the new generation thing that my phone turns into would probably end up being the answer.
Okay.
And they're simply because it would be portable and pluggable into any other medium. And that technology exists today to be able to do that, but I haven't spent the money to basically gear up in that regard.
Right.
Yeah, well, essentially, it had a much more cumbersome mounting mechanism than a CD does, in the sense that you would cue it up, hit the start thing, it would drop down, the needle would go over. Some record players were automated, some you actually had to move the needle over and do it. The needles, of course, would wear out, so they'd have to be replaced every now and then. But it was sort of a one-off. There were some record players that you could queue up a stack of records, but if you did that, you're risking having the records scratch each other. It's a reasonably fragile medium. They could warp if you put them down wrong. They could scratch if you scratched them, or you stacked them up. So it was sort of a one-off. And it was both sort of a social kind of a thing, the sort of the act of putting a record on and playing it. People did that at parties. People argued about what record you'd play next, kind of a thing. I think the honest answer is I've been sort of a second or third mover. So I've never been sort of a person to go right out and buy a new technology just because it's a new technology.
Okay.
And part of that is probably due to just I've been chronically busy since I was in high school. But the other part is that with many new technologies, the second iteration works better than the first iteration, and so there can be a hassle factor involved in sort of being at the cutting edge of adopting a new technology. The people who get stuff first end up being the unintentional beta testers.
Yeah.
So, as sort of musical technologies have evolved, and I've gone from listening to albums when I was a kid, then in high school I had an 8-track tape player in the car I had. That didn't last long because that technology went out about that time. Yeah. Cassettes were huge for a while, so the first few bands I was in, our first releases were on cassette. And then we put a vinyl album out in the early 80s, one of the last vinyl albums, I think, as CDs came in. And then CDs have had quite a nice run for it.
Yeah.
And now we're at the edge where, most people in the music business are starting to think we're at the end of CDs. I mean, they're basically going to disappear over the next 10 years as well, as essentially digital distribution and sort of the whole virtual music market becomes the new norm. You'd basically remove it, put it in your CD player, and hit play. Fairly simple. In terms of actually acquiring stuff or doing stuff on an iPod, you've got to actually access a site, figure out whether or not it's free or you're going to pay for it, bring it in, and so forth and so on. But that's low-key stick put. Yeah, it also opens whole new doors to distribution in the sense that the whole digital distribution world is one in which, do you really need a record company? No. What you need is the ability to record music, and then you can make it available online. Getting people to actually know that your music's there is a whole other story, which is traditionally sort of what a record label would do, is essentially promote and advertise. But the whole model of how you produce and sell and consume music has changed, and that's not going to stop. We could probably not even imagine 50 years from now the way that people are going to be doing it. The two ways that I would go now is either if I had a CD of it, I would do that first because I've got the way for me to play that at home the loudest is that, and then I don't have an iPod, but I have an iPod on my phone. So basically, I'd go to my phone as the other way to do it. It could be anything. I mean, I'm tempted to basically answer that the distributed digital devices that allow you access to your own personal music library that you've stored on the cloud somewhere is probably the way it'll go. Because then you could sort of store your own library. The way people used to have record collections, but it would fill the wall of their living room. I think people will be able to do that by sort of compiling and collating and sorting their own music to their own taste and storing it in a remote location, and that the technological advance will essentially be the ability to access that reliably and regularly anywhere, in which case you can sort of separate out the collecting of the technology and the delivering of the technology. And I'd look forward to that. That'd actually be really we're basically on the verge of being able to have that, but whereas the technologies for CDs are incredibly widely distributed now, now that we're at the tail end of their life cycle, new technologies aren't that widely available. So when that becomes easy, cheap, and widely distributed and reliable, I think that'd be great.